Wider shoulders are awesome, right? Right? I'm nervous about my exam. I'm standing and there's people in front of me and in front of me and in front of me and behind me and behind me and behind me. And to my side, there's people all lined up. To my other side, there's people all lined up. And my teachers are walking around and they're making sure we're not speaking. They're making sure we're not communicating. As even though the exam hasn't started, we're already under exam-like conditions. We have to be silent. And then I see one guy, a friend of mine, and he's got this grin on his face. He's smiling and he's happy and I can't get why. It's not that he's top of the class. It's not that he's bottom of the class. He's just an average guy. And for whatever reason, he's got this beaming smile. And then I'm struggling. This is one of the hardest exams I think I've done so far. I'm writing my answers in. Every single time, I feel like I've got it wrong. I turn to the guy. He's a couple of seats back. And every time I look at him, he's smiling, he's grinning. And yet he's not even on the same page as I am. He's like 5 pages before. And this is one of the most stressful things I'm going through. This is not easy. When the exam bell finally rings, I go up to him and he's still smiling. I have like a sunken feeling. I know I didn't do good. And yet he looks so happy. And so I ask him, why have you been so happy about this? Why does it look like you're anticipating this exam, like you've loved doing it? And then he tells me that for the past 5 years, he's been working up to this final exam, just like all of us. Every single lesson has been building up to that one point, and he's got it over with. He's finally finished that thing, and he'll never ever have to do it again. He's done. So why would he not be happy about it? Why would he stress and overthink it when the second this is over, it's over? That's when it occurred to me, there are some things that we just have to accept. And there's something I'll talk about later which will bring this idea up again, and you'll understand why I started with this. Now, one of the first things that obviously they don't tell you about getting wider shoulders is the fact that you can't fit through doors. This is a bit of a joke. It's a little bit of a joke I wrote in because that is not something serious. I'm not going to sit here and be like, you can't sit through doors, you can't do this, you can't do that. Because that is rubbish. No one wants to come here for that. They want to actually find out real interesting things. Although, that being said, I am one of the few people where getting through a door is an issue. See, we have this entire situation with my cats where basically we have 4 cats. It's too much. I don't want a single one. But essentially, 2 of the cats don't like each other. 2 of the other cats don't like each other. And so if they're together, they're fighting. And so it's like the riddle where the farmer has to get like the chicken and the wolf and the grain, and it has to like move them across the river without like anyone dying. That's the scenario that we basically have to do. And because these 2 cats can't be in the same room, obviously the door has to stay shut at all times. But when you have a cat who's trying to kill the other one and they're like praying at the door, getting in and out is pretty difficult. And so for me, the complication I have is my frame is too wide. So when I'm trying to get in and out the door, it's very, very difficult, and I can barely do it without like them coming through and stuff. So for some few people in very few unique, nuanced situations, yes, getting through a doorway is a problem, but I don't think that's common. Now, again, this is like an odd excuse. If anyone told you that they're not going to get bigger shoulders because they have to get through the door because their cats are going to fight, you would laugh it off. You would not understand what they're doing. You'd think it's a load of rubbish, and you're right. So we're going to actually work out how you achieve these things people don't actually tell you. The thing about training shoulders is you can imagine your gym right now, and you can imagine the guys doing the shoulder exercises. They're doing front delt raises, which makes no sense because 1, that's not actually going to do anything to grow your shoulder. Your front delt is being adequately hit when you're doing any sort of pressing movement. But 2, what else are they doing? They're doing their laterals. Okay, we're getting somewhere with that. Maybe they're doing some weird shoulder presses. Maybe they're doing other stuff. Doesn't really matter. But the common theme we see here is they're using really, really, really light weight. And they're doing a ton of reps. There's also a guy you probably can imagine who's doing lateral raises. And he's one of the few guys using heavy weight. But his form looks like he's using his rotators, right? He's doing like that. He is wrecking his shoulders. He's damaging them. And it's not looking good. It really isn't looking good. And his shoulders aren't really growing. So there's that too. Now, I used to be this sort of guy. A lot of my friends used to be this sort of person before I like actually put them onto how to train properly. And so of course the first thing I had to fix was the fact that I was using lightweight and too many reps. You know, the muscle, people are like, oh, the shoulder requires different rep ranges. It's not true. It's not true. I don't know where this idea came from, but it's completely wrong. There's nothing backing it up. And so when it comes to a movement like this, it's no different from any other movement. We don't have to start giving it weird rep ranges like 5 to 10. 5 to 10 or 8 to 12. Literally, I prefer going to 5 to 10. It's my like channel gold standard. But if you'd like 8 to 12, sure. The point is, you don't have to go up to these like 20 rep sets because it hits the shoulder more. It doesn't. And that is the problem. But the big problem that I actually used to do is I used to shorten the movement arm. So I used to bend my arms when doing laterals. Now, one thing I do want to point out is when doing laterals, you should never go directly to the side. That's a lot of trap. And of course, going directly to the front is a lot of front delt. You're aiming for something in the middle, so it's in the scapular plane, and it's a nice motion. See, I was doing that, right? I was going in the middle, but I'd have that bend. And so it would essentially make it where there's not only a ton of stress on my elbow joint, but it's actually becoming more of a front delt and more of a trap movement. So don't do that. But things happen, mistakes happen, and that's why I can teach you guys, because I've made mistakes. Not more than most, but more than some. So this is like step 1 almost. Start using a higher weight. Train to failure and don't use any momentum, as momentum is gonna create a scenario where how can we progressively overload if 1 week you might just be using more momentum? You're like, oh yeah, I got an extra rep, and in reality you just swung that little bit harder. Like, this is why we don't use momentum. We cannot count reps and we cannot progressively overload without really knowing what's going on. Now, the next thing that happens, the next thing they don't tell you about getting wider shoulders, is the fact that you genuinely have to buy an entirely new wardrobe every single month. When I first started university, I spent £600 buying a new wardrobe. This is my first opportunity to have money, my first opportunity to really find my style. You know, the period before that was COVID, I wasn't really doing anything, and before that I hadn't been working. I didn't really have the money to buy a wardrobe. And I was so happy about this happening, and then 6 months later, none of it fits me anymore. See, since this point, I haven't really bought new clothes other than oversized clothing. And this is my recommendation here. If you can purchase oversized clothing, what it will allow you to do is basically have clothing that will fit you no matter what. No matter if you're cutting, no matter if you're bulking, it will work on you and it will not look the best, but it will look good. Now, of course, it's obvious clothes that fit well are gonna look better. But unless you're making a ton of money, you do not have the ability to afford buying a new wardrobe, donating it to charity, and then continuously going in this cycle. You're just not there yet. Unless you have a Gymshark sponsorship or you're making somehow a ton of money, don't worry about that. Just focus on your money, spend that in a better place, get oversized clothing. That's almost step 2. The next thing guys don't really tell you is there's a lot of focus on the lateral delts, the side delts, because you know that's going to make you look wider from the front. But the rear delt is just as important. In fact, if you look at someone from the side and they have a lagging rear delt, it looks weird. Their shoulder isn't capped, it's not fully connecting with their back, it's just odd. I never really biased my rear delt efficiently, but there was one thing I did do. I did a ton of rows where I was effectively hitting the rear delt, and this meant my rear delts were bigger than most. However, there was one day where I was like, let's try out a rear delt exercise. And I'd maybe done some before that, but the rear delt exercises weren't really performed properly. You know, there's a lot of scapular movement, so it was mainly my upper back instead of my actual shoulders, and I wanted to really focus on the rear delt. I go home, after finally doing that exercise correctly, I look in the mirror and my rear delt is just... And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, where did that come from? There is an alien growing on my arm. And ever since then, it has been a joy checking out the rear delt pump after hitting them. Even though I don't do it like every single back day, it is a beautiful thing to train and hit properly. Rear delts definitely make a difference. Now, I have a tendency of skipping rear delts a lot of the time because I do hit it adequately with rows. And I do think if you're doing a proper row where you're kind of at like a 45-degree angle, we don't actually need to hit the rear delts. Although, just like everything, you know, building big abs, you want to do some isolations. Building big rear delts, yeah, throw it in. 2 to 4 sets a week. Let's get you doing some rear delt rows and really focusing on actually using that muscle. Your upper back isn't moving at all, that's stationary. The only thing that's going on is your upper arm is going like that, right? Your upper arm is going from extended to there. And we don't have to overextend, because if you overextend, you're not using your rear delt. So why would we do that? We're just taking tension off of the muscle. Going back to that original story I told you, insertions matter, right? So your clavicle bone is going to determine how you look, how broad you are. And so someone who's got like a kind of a narrow one, I think I have something in the middle. But if it's narrower, you could literally see someone with double the size of your clavicle, or maybe 50% more, and they might have not even hit the gym, but they will look wider just because their bone is wider. And so this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. You have to smile, you have to accept it, you have to understand that it's going to happen, right? You have to be 100% complacent with your genetics because, yeah, we're gonna do our best to build the best achieve. We're gonna do our best to achieve the best. We're gonna do our best to build a physique. But at the end of the day, we do have insertions, we do have genetics, and your shoulder can attach in many different ways to a bone. And so guys will look different. But when you have your shirt off, it's honestly all the same when it comes to looking broad-shouldered. So that's not really an issue there. But in the end, if you are one of those guys, train as I've described. Because otherwise, it's kind of game over. You've got two very important places you can go now. One, you can check out the training principles on the left, or two, you can check out the body fat, or two, you can watch the video on the right to efficiently calculate your calories.